and welcome to What the Hype for The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 2. You guys, we're alive. We made it.
We did.
Yeah, more or
We
less.
made it. Ugh.
We lived to see this moment in time adapted from the video game to the screen, and, you know, essentially what is the inciting incident for the game that it's based on, The Last of Us Part 2, and the rest of the show for a bit, I think, based on what Mason said in the making of. I just wanted to say to the audience, there will be spoilers for tonight's episode.
So many.
In case that was not 100% clear a moment ago, you still have time to leave without finding out the big moment that, frankly, has been kept from you for at least 5 years now. If you don't know what was happening and going to happen tonight, preserve that.
Yeah,
because...
frankly, this is the spoiler. Like, of all the Last of Us spoilers,
Yeah.
this is the spoiler.
Yes. So, Chelsea, Laura, that said, welcome back, by the way.
Hi.
And what are you feeling? Tell me your thoughts. What are you feeling right now in the aftermath of Episode 2, Through the Valley?
Man, what an appropriate title for an episode, first of all.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I was saying to Chelsea just before we started going live, my first big takeaway is going into this episode, I had no idea how they were going to up the ante on this episode, because first of all, one final spoiler warning here. Spoiler. Leave if you don't want to hear this.
This is the scene in Labyrinth where they're like, did she say it?
Say it.
It.
But we're about to. Chelsea actually called this out when we were doing our pre-season 2 coverage of The Last of Us. Chelsea predicted that we were going to get Joel's death at the end of the second episode, and she was completely on point. So, points to you, Chelsea.
Thanks.
I'm
I'm
honestly,
so glad
you
to
know,
be
a
right about
golf
this
clap
thing.
over here.
Before we started recording, the golf clap is timely, is very,
gosh.
is very appropriate.
Oh, too soon.
I gotta
too
say,
soon.
I poured some whiskey to honor. At first, it was to honor Joel, but now it's to honor Chelsea on predicting when the death would
thanks.
occur. So, congratulations, all over. How are you feeling, Chelsea?
I'm feeling really good. Really good is subjective, I suppose. I am here and I've stopped crying. And I mean, gosh, it was a fantastic episode. Just like how I'll start it off, there's obviously so much to discuss, but for the three of us to know exactly how it was going to end, for them to still raise the stakes and like keep me on the edge of my seat and on the verge of tears for like 90% of this episode until the dam burst, and then I was full on sobbing for the last part. It's just incredible that they were able to pull that off. Because we've known the spoiler for 5 years. And
well, that's the thing I want to just prelude here of saying, you know, in case we mention this in a way that rubs audience members, people who are listening to our show that haven't played the game, the wrong way, we have known about the secret for 5 years. And so ultimately your grief may be in some ways higher and fresher than ours. So if we're not being careless, we're not meaning to take something out on a character and be like, oh, well, that was a given. But we have had a few years to like, not warm to the idea, but like brace ourselves for the worst. And
yeah, we've been through all the steps.
If you find yourself hurting more than it is obvious that we are for Joel and for the characters of this universe, we're not assholes. Let me assure you, your feelings are valid. But I'm able to come off of this episode and, like Chelsea said, I feel good. Like, I honestly feel it's for all the reasons that were stated already. They upped the stakes somehow, but more importantly for me, they stuck the landing. they continued the Mason Druckmann dream team here has once again delivered on the promise of adapting the story from the game on which it's based, and heightening and building in little things that touch on a wider picture that's being told at the same time. There's more of that in this episode. It's just my mind is blown. And yeah, the contents of the episode were sad, but I felt like beside myself going, this is really good. Separate from the horrible events.
For sure. And just wanted to call out Jamie, who's listening to us live on YouTube. Hey, Jamie, thanks for joining us live after the episode. Jamie also adding some crying, laughing emojis that I think might have been for the golf clap reference. But also adding, it was rough. It was a rough episode. And, you know, I'm not going to deny anyone that, because like you said, Eric, as people who've been holding on to this for 5 years, it was really rough playing through it the first time too. And actually, I don't know if that's where we want to start, like pulling threads from this episode, is looking at the way that this whole storyline around Joel's death was adapted from the game, because largely it played out the same, but there were some key differences in the way that they portrayed it in the show that I thought were really interesting.
First off, remind me, wasn't Tommy with Joel when they encountered Abby in the game?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think that's a fantastic change, because Tommy's got his own thing to worry about. That's the other half of this episode of raising the stakes. And I loved Tommy's arc in this episode and his struggles and like what all of that represented. And then for Dina to be with Joel gives Abby double motivation to try and gives Ellie double motivation to try and catch up to them, to figure out what's going on. And it also brings Jesse in, because he's got that attachment to Dina. And I mean, like, it makes sense the way they made that change. And I am really pleased with it as a change, because again, it makes sense. And I think there's a certain, in the game, there's a certain believability that you have to kind of like set aside when Tommy's there and isn't able to help like Joel succumb or like overcome this gang of young adults. And so to make it Dina instead and make it Joel against these 5-6 other people, I think that makes it a little bit more believable. And the threat against Dina's life, making him surrender in that moment, again, just kind of makes more sense. So it was a really smart change. And then the stuff they gave Tommy to do was much more interesting anyways.
I like that a lot, and they've set Dina up as almost a surrogate daughter, like almost like the way Ellie is, like a second daughter to Joel, and so having her be present while he was still cognizant works on that level as well. He was able to say goodbye to Dina. I think he knew that was what was up, and I think Dina pretty much knew that something bad was going to happen when she was put to sleep, and he got to say goodbye to her when he was fully conscious. He also gets to say goodbye to Ellie, of course, in a manner that is similar to the game. But and here's the thing, I don't think it gets necessarily easier. What playing through this moment in the game, I really don't think it gets easier. But what felt during watching the show like it was a feast for me is how it felt, because they were able to show just slightly more of the perspective from the rest of the Salt Lake crew. Yeah. There are some really interesting things that are happening in this episode between the Salt Lake crew and Abby and their motivations. And you kind of get the sense, even in the game, they don't really want to be there. You learn a lot more about them toward the back half of the game. But the fact that it's present here and the choices that are made in this episode really deepen and characterize that whole element of it, which will clearly play a huge important role in this season. Even we got kind of a nod to Isaac, who's like way the hell, like, there's clearly a direction that the show is going in, and the added texture that they've put on top of this horrifying moment just for like the audience's eyes feels like a treat. And I was just really again, I have to avert my eyes, but just like when Joel was killing all the fireflies on the show, the camera was looking away. I was touched and relieved at the moments during this episode when the camera was looking away as well. I felt kind of saved. The game, I think, shows more of the blows being landed.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty.
And as a matter of fact, the final blow is very different in the game from what I recall to what we see in this episode. I think for the episode and to make it palatable for television, they had to not have Joel eat the club or the head of a golf club, which is what happens in the game, and it is a brutal.
Gosh, yeah.
I'll say, not to say that this isn't, but I think that there was a strategic choice made, and I thought it was so interesting, and I would need to go back and revisit the gameplay. There is this moment right after Abby stabs Joel in the neck with the broken golf club where she makes eye contact with Ellie, and there's almost this malevolent, like, yeah, justice has been done, I did that type vibe. At least that's what I perceived coming off of her. And I really wonder if all of these changes they've made, having Dina be there instead of Tommy so that Dina can be the person who gives Ellie all the intel that she needs on the WLF.
We see that in the preview.
And all these people, because Tommy probably, wouldn't want to encourage Ellie to go on a vengeance trip, but Dina totally would.
Well, and Tommy's got stakes in it. That's but at the same time, this so smartly weaves Dina and Ellie into a reliance cycle on each other in a way that they just never would have been before, and I think it's safe to say weren't in the game. In the game, it's really their would-be relationship that I think propels them, and the fact that they do ultimately care about each other. But in this setup, Dina had more to lose by Joel's death herself because they had a relationship, and the additional, her feelings for Ellie are augmented by the fact that she really is capable. She was perceiving everything that was happening to her, even when she was recovering from a frostbitten hand. So it really only adds things to Dina's character that I think are wonderful for the future.
Yeah, agreed.
Because we're talking about Abby giving a look to Ellie, and I don't recall the exact moment. What I recall of Abby after she lands the killing, the stab, still with the golf club.
And by the way, I think that shows an increased level of violence, that change specifically. Instead of her smashing him over the head with the golf club, she's already beaten him so hard with it that it snapped in half, and she still finishes the job with the golf club.
You're exactly
but it's a completely different context that shows the brutality. And there's a moment when she's just kneeling over Joel and beating his face to a pulp that mimics a moment from the previous episode where they're trying to get Abby's attention in that moment, and she's just completely closed off to the world. Ellie had the same moment in the previous episode when she was training and fighting, and Jesse had to basically pull her off of the other guy because she was so absorbed in the violence. And so we're already seeing how, of the same coin, cut from the same cloth, Abby and Ellie both are in a lot of ways.
Totally. Yeah, they are two sides of the same coin. That is exactly right.
For me, let's talk about Abby in this episode, because her character, she is given a few more things for us to get to know kind of who she is before she does the horrible thing. In the game, you're playing as her, but that's limiting to what you get. In this episode, I want to say, Caitlin Dever, it's almost a more vulnerable Abby. She's out on patrol, and she's like, oh, it's cold. And she's like, a whole hour of this? And these comments are making me think wow, this is not the militant, she's dedicated, she wants to be here, but she's human the way the rest of us are. In the game, you can kind of skirt by that because you're the survivor character, but watching how she even was going to go in before her shift was up, which would have certainly led to something bad for the rest of her crew, who are all out there risking their lives. I'm like, she's making choices that are like ultimately more human, but also that are like not super great for the rest of her. Like, she's abandoning her watch essentially, or was about to, right when things happen. And I think ultimately the thing that sticks with me for this episode in Caitlin Deaver's portrayal of Abby is after she does the deed and she's kneeling over Joel after he's, the killing blow, she seems pretty traumatized. I don't think what I don't see from her in that moment, or when they're walking away, when the whole crew is walking away in the snow, what I don't see on her face is satisfaction. That's not what I see. I think you've committed a horrible act, and I think that alone will continue to haunt you, just as up until a minute ago, your thirst for revenge was haunting you. Now that you've got it, we didn't see her grin. I think she looks traumatized.
Well, the pre-opening credits scene for this episode is we get Abby dreaming, and she's walking down a hospital, and she comes across herself. But what was really interesting to me is that she said, "I don't know who you are. I don't recognize you." And so this was her younger self discovering what happened to, spoiler, I guess, her father. I mean, we're past spoilers, but that we learned it officially in this episode, that the surgeon who was going to operate on Ellie in the previous season and
come up with a
was
cure
going
for
to
all humanity.
end her life. Yes. That dichotomy of ending her life versus potentially saving humanity. But as she's approaching that room, her current self says, "He's dead. His brains are on the floor. You don't want to go in there." And so we're seeing this distance between the Abby who she was and the Abby she is now, and her not recognizing who she has become. And I think that is fully realized by the end of this episode, like you were talking about, Eric. She has lost a vital part of her humanity by going through with this incredibly violent act.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, ultimately, I think it goes to show that part of the message is it's not going to make you feel any better. And it's certainly not going to put your life on a different, better trajectory. It's just constantly repeating the cycle of violence. And yeah, in this, we get to see Ellie basically become Abby. Now she's in Abby's shoes, and she's like, my father figure was killed by someone, so now I'm gonna F you up.
Yeah, and I appreciated how, I mean, it's not any easier in the game. Like, Ellie is made helpless very easily. She's quickly outnumbered. I was wondering too, when the killer Joel, that this show is famous for showing us Pedro really capable of murder. Like, I look at him playing Joel and I'm like, yeah, he could kill innocent people easily. I was wondering when he would defend himself, when killer Joel would show up. And if I can pre-anticipate some of the feedback, maybe for this episode, maybe some people would also like, oh, I would have liked him to at least be able to take out one or two of them. But like, no, you got to understand this is the Joel has known, I think, for a while that his number would come due, or that karma would come back around, or that ultimately he could not be free from this mark, from this stain on his soul. And I think that although he doesn't know quite what's in store for him, I think there's a certain understanding that he comes to pretty quick with Abby once she's put the gun on Dina, that he knows that this is the time. This is the day that he dies.
Yeah. I think this was also, like, at a high level, fairly game accurate, too, because the fact of the matter is he's just severely outnumbered and outgunned. Mm-hmm. And he literally gets his knee blown apart. Once that happens, there's really not much defending yourself,
That's a fair point.
Something that's interesting about the writing, and this is from the game too, but it's interesting how Abby's quest for vengeance is almost like, I can see how she would see it as justified by the fact that Joel is delivered to her on a silver platter, right? Like, The way this episode opens after the opening credits, and they're hanging out in the lodge and they're looking down and like, oh crap, Jackson is a lot bigger than we expected. There's no way we're going to be able to pull this off. Abby is like, we're still going to find a way. Everybody else is saying behind her back, you know, we're going to try and convince her we need to go back because this is a suicide mission. And so she goes out on her scouting quest, and who does she happen upon but Joel?
Hell.
And it's just insane that looking at impossible odds, Joel just stumbles across her. Yes, saves her life, which is a fantastic twist. And I love that they keep that moment intact where there's like a sliver of hope that she's going to let Joel off the hook because he has saved her life. And then she announces to everybody, and this is Joel. And the atmosphere completely changes and like it's downhill from there. But just leading up to that, the fact that Abby came, like she's been living her life these past 5 years thinking, this is my life's purpose. I have to avenge my father and kill this man who killed all of these fireflies. What was the number they gave us? 18 soldiers
18.
Plus her father. So killed all these people. And I am going to pursue him for 5 years. We're going to hunt him down. We're going to figure out where he's living. We're going to go to where he's living and we're going to drag him out. We're going to kill him slowly because that's what he deserves. And for that to be her purpose. And then, oh, Joel, he's right here. He just like shows up. Like I can imagine her thinking, okay,
relieved too, right. Because it's like, let's get this over with. They all just want it over with. They want it over with. And you look at what kind of people are capable of this kind of monstrosity, and it's like, honestly, they did it because the opportunity struck. And it would have looked very different if Abby hadn't just come across Joel at the right exact moment. But the way in which everything came together in service of that was just stunning. And yeah, sure, it's in the game, but equally, devastating. We have so much more that happened in this episode to talk about. I know we're not done talking about Abby and Joel, but let's think on this. And where do we go? Where do we go from here? Where does the show go from here?